I still remember the exact moment I met Nicole. I was 25, working part-time at a music venue downtown while finishing my degree. She came in with a group of friends, one of those big birthday dinners where everyone talks over each other. I wasn't even their server, but I ended up bringing their drinks over because the bartender was slammed. Nicole thanked me and cracked some joke about the size of the ice cubes. I don't remember what she said, just the way she smiled when she said it. It was easy with her. You know how some people are all effort and performance? Nicole wasn't like that. She was warm and confident and a little unpredictable in the best way. I found out later she worked in marketing, which made sense. She was quick on her feet and had this way of making people feel seen, like whatever you were saying was more interesting than it probably was. We started dating soon after. It wasn't some whirlwind thing where we ran off and eloped or anything dramatic. It was steady, intentional. We went on long walks just to talk, tried new recipes together in her tiny apartment kitchen, stayed up watching movies we never finished because we kept pausing them to talk. It felt like we were building something from the start. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to her, and she never made me feel small for still figuring things out. 3 years later, I proposed on a hike, just the two of us. Nothing flashy. I had the ring in my sock the whole time because I was too nervous she'd notice it in my pocket. I asked her to marry me on a lookout point overlooking the valley where we had our first real conversation. She said yes through tears, and then laughed because I was shaking so hard I could barely get the ring on her finger. Our wedding was beautiful. Simple, outdoors, close friends and family. My brother Jake was my best man. He's 2 years younger, and we've always been tight. He gave a speech about how Nicole brought out a version of me he hadn't seen since we were kids. And honestly, he was right. She softened me in the best way. After the honeymoon, we settled into a rhythm that felt good. We bought a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing flashy, but it had a small garden out back and just enough space to grow into. I took a project management position with a construction firm, and Nicole climbed the ladder fast at her marketing agency. She was a natural. Everyone seemed to love working with her. We weren't flashy people. We liked Friday night takeout and watching reruns of old shows on the couch. We liked having our own routines. She liked to journal in the mornings. I liked to take evening walks to clear my head. Sundays were for grocery runs and meal prepping and arguing over whose turn it was to do the laundry. But it was a good life. It really was. We talked about kids a lot. At first, it was more of a someday thing, and then one day it became a let's try thing. When Nicole found out she was pregnant, I remember just standing in the kitchen, holding that little plastic stick like it was some sacred artifact. I was scared, sure. But more than anything, I was in awe of the fact that we were building a life, a real life, together. One with tiny footsteps in the hallway and crayon drawings on the fridge. I didn't know then that those would become some of the most cherished memories I'd ever hold on to. But I'll get there. This was just the beginning. If I close my eyes and really try, I can still picture what those early mornings looked like in our house after Evan was born. Nicole would be sitting in the corner of the living room, one leg tucked underneath her, bouncing him gently on her shoulder as the sun filtered in through the blinds. She'd whisper to him like he was listening to every word, about the birds outside, or what kind of day it was going to be, or the dream she had the night before. I'd stand in the doorway, half awake, coffee in hand, watching them and wondering how I ever got so lucky. We weren't sleeping much, and there were always bottles to clean or diapers to change or some new parenting article Nicole found that she wanted us to read. But still, we were in it together. We settled into parenthood in a way that felt like we'd rehearsed it in another life. She was a natural with Evan, somehow always knowing what he needed before he cried, always the calm in the storm when he was teething or sick. I took longer to find my footing. I remember fumbling with the car seat straps, or panicking the first time I had to take his temperature. But Nicole was patient with me and never once made me feel like I wasn't doing enough. She used to say, "We're figuring it out, babe." That's the whole thing. Nobody starts off perfect. And she was right. We didn't always get it right, but we showed up. Every day. Together. My brother Jake became a regular presence in Evan's life too, especially in those first couple years. He lived about 20 minutes away and would drop by on Sundays with groceries or a six-pack, or just to hang out and give us a breather. Nicole and Jake always got along well. They had the same kind of dry, sarcastic humor, and they'd gang up on me about my bad taste in snacks or the way I folded laundry. It never bothered me. If anything, it felt good to have that closeness, to know we were surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us. As Evan grew, so did we. Our house transformed over time. The coffee table gave way to a playpen, the walls were decorated with finger paint and stick figure drawings, and our once quiet evenings became filled with squeals and lullabies and the occasional Lego underfoot. But I loved it. I loved hearing Nicole sing softly to him as she rocked him to sleep, or the way she'd narrate bedtime stories with voices and accents that cracked him up. Watching them together was like watching a piece of my heart outside my body. There were challenges, of course. Money got tight sometimes, and our schedules were often opposite, with me starting early and her working late. But we managed. We always managed. We made time for each other, even if it was just a glass of wine on the porch after Evan was in bed, or a quick breakfast before the day kicked off. I always felt like we were on the same team, that whatever came our way, we'd face it side by side. Looking back, I think I held on to those years so tightly because they felt so full of love, of purpose, of belonging. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I had what I wanted, a family, a partner who challenged and grounded me, a son who lit up my world. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And at the time, I wouldn't have traded it for anything. It never once occurred to me that everything I loved most could become the source of my deepest pain. But that part of the story hasn't come yet. This was still the chapter where everything felt whole. There's something about routine that, over time, starts to feel sacred. For us, it wasn't about big vacations or fancy date nights. It was about those small, almost invisible rituals that stitched the days together. Every Friday night, once Evan was asleep, Nicole and I would order takeout from the same Thai place, split a beer, and watch whatever show we were binging at the time. She always stole the last spring roll, and I always let her. She'd tease me about my predictable choices. I'm a pad CEW guy through and through, and I'd roll my eyes as if it wasn't the exact kind of banter I lived for. Our mornings had their rhythm too. I'd be up early for work, and she'd still be half asleep, wrapped in the sheets, her hair a mess, arm flopped across the bed. Sometimes she'd stir just enough to mumble something incoherent as I kissed her on the forehead and headed out. On weekends, it was her turn to sleep in while I made breakfast with Evan. He'd sit on the counter with his little legs swinging, helping me stir pancake batter, while I tried not to panic about the eggshells he dropped in the bowl. When Nicole finally came down in her robe, smelling like coconut shampoo, she'd act shocked that we hadn't burned the place down yet. And somehow, every time, it felt like the best kind of success. Holidays were something special to her. She had a whole storage bin labeled just for fall decorations. I'm talking pumpkins, cinnamon candles, themed dish towels, the whole 9 yards. And she had a soft spot for Christmas, maybe because her own childhood had been a little unstable. She said it was the one time of year she felt like magic was real, even if just for a few weeks. So every December, we transformed the house. Lights on the windows, carols playing softly in the background, matching pajamas none of us looked good in, but all wore anyway. Evan's first Christmas, she cried while watching him try to eat wrapping paper. I remember thinking, over and over, that this was it. This was the good stuff. That maybe we weren't making headlines or chasing some flashy dream, but we had something real, something you could hold in your hands. I was proud of the life we built. I was proud to be her husband, Evan's dad, the guy who fixed leaky faucets and mowed the lawn on Sundays and didn't mind watching the same cartoon movie for the 100th time because it made my son laugh until he hiccuped. And maybe most of all, I trusted her. Fully. Without question. Nicole wasn't just my wife, she was my person. My best friend. The one I told everything to, the one I turned to when I didn't know what to do. We didn't agree on everything, sure, but we talked through it. We were a team. I never once believed she would break that. Why would I? At the time, I still believed some things were unshakable. But you can only see the cracks in hindsight. It started with little things. The kind of changes you almost talk yourself out of noticing. Like the way Nicole stopped asking how my day was when I came home from work. I'd walk through the door, tired and carrying the weight of whatever chaos had unfolded on the job site, and she'd barely look up from her phone. No, hey, babe, no smile, just a distracted or a nod. I chalked it up to exhaustion. Parenting wears you down. Marriage has seasons, I told myself. Maybe we were just in a quieter one. Then her schedule started shifting. She began staying late at work more often. A big client, she said. You know how Q4 is, she joked once, but there was something rehearsed in the way she said it. Like she'd practiced the line before I even asked. And I wanted to believe her, of course I did. Nicole had always been driven, always taken pride in her job. But still, it felt different this time. She started coming home later and later. At first, she'd text me to say she was running behind, Then eventually, she stopped texting altogether. I'd hear the garage door go up at 9:15, 9:30, sometimes close to 10. She'd walk in, kiss Evan goodnight if he was still up, and then retreat to the shower without really saying much. One night, I asked if everything was okay, with work, with us, and she gave me this look like I'd just accused her of a crime. God, why are you being so weird? She snapped. Not everything is some big deal, you know. I remember feeling embarrassed, like I'd overstepped, even though I just asked a simple question. I said I was just worried, and she sighed like I was exhausting her. I'm tired, okay? I've got enough going on without feeling like I have to coddle you too. That one stung. I didn't say anything back. I just nodded and left the room. Then came the phone stuff. Nicole had never been secretive about her phone. We both knew each other's passcodes, shared playlists, calendar invites, the works. But suddenly she started keeping it face down. She took it with her everywhere, bathroom, laundry room, even outside to water the plants. If I so much as glanced at the screen when it buzzed, she'd shift her body like she was shielding it. I tried to convince myself it was just work stress. Maybe she was venting to a friend, blowing off steam. Everyone deserves some privacy, right? Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. It wasn't just what she was doing, it was what she wasn't doing. She'd stopped touching me. No more reaching for my hand in the car, no quick kisses in the kitchen while dinner simmered. When I tried to initiate, she'd either brush me off or claim she was too tired, too busy, had a headache, had a deadline. I counted once, we went 6 weeks without sleeping together. Not even a conversation about it. Just a slow, quiet pulling away. The worst part was the gaslighting. I didn't call it that at the time. I didn't have the language for it yet, but I felt it. When I'd bring up how disconnected she seemed, she'd twist it back on me. Maybe you're just imagining things, she said once, with this tight little smile. You've always been a little paranoid. Was I? I honestly started to wonder. I'd lie awake at night next to her, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this what people meant when they said marriages change? Was this normal? Or was something happening that I couldn't see? I didn't want to believe it. I really didn't. But something had shifted, and I was starting to feel like the only one who noticed. I didn't want to be the guy who snoops. The kind of husband who checks his wife's phone while she's in the shower or watches her location on Find My iPhone like it's some twisted reality show. But the truth is, when things start to feel off, when every hug feels rehearsed and every excuse arrives too quickly, you either let it eat you alive, or you start looking for answers. It started with something small. One night, Nicole was asleep early, or pretending to be, and I noticed her phone buzzing on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't think twice. But this time, the name on the screen wasn't familiar. Just a first name, Jay. I froze. It could have been a coworker, a friend, anyone. But something in me just reacted. Before I could stop myself, I picked up the phone. The message was short. Hope you made it home okay. Can't stop thinking about earlier. I stared at it for what felt like forever, waiting for some kind of rational explanation to present itself. But it didn't come. And what's worse, the conversation was gone by morning. Deleted. Like it had never existed. After that, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Her wardrobe changed, not drastically, but enough. New tops. New perfume. She started wearing lipstick again, even on days when she said she had just meetings. I asked her about it once, and she laughed, said she was just trying to feel more put together. Fair. But why now? And why only on the days she stayed late? I checked her calendar once while she was putting Evan to bed. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then again, it's easy to leave things off the calendar when you don't want them seen. I tried talking to her again a few nights later. I told her I missed her, that I didn't know what was happening between us, but I felt like I was losing her in slow motion. She looked at me, stone-faced, and said, "You're not losing me. You're just being dramatic." That word, dramatic, echoed in my head long after she rolled over and turned her back to me. I even started watching Evan more closely, wondering if he noticed anything. Kids are perceptive in a way we don't give them credit for. And he'd started asking why Mommy wasn't home for dinner so much anymore. I didn't know what to say. I told him she was working hard, that she loved him. It felt like a lie. The hardest part wasn't the late nights, or the phone secrecy, or even the emotional distance. It was the fact that I still wanted to believe her. That despite everything my gut was screaming, I wanted to be wrong. I wanted her to take my hand, look me in the eye, and tell me she still loved me, and mean it. But she didn't. And the space between us, once filled with laughter and shared routines, was starting to feel like a wall I couldn't climb. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. But I knew I couldn't keep living like this, constantly guessing, constantly doubting my own mind. So I made a quiet decision that night. If she wouldn't give me the truth, I was going to find it myself. There's a particular kind of silence that grows between two people who used to be close. Not the kind that's peaceful, but the kind that hums with all the things you're not saying. That's what it felt like between Nicole and me now. The conversations still happened, about Evan's bedtime, groceries, bills, but the space between her words had changed. Like she was there, physically, but something else had left the room. I kept trying to tell myself it was just a rough patch. Every couple goes through it. The late nights at work, the phone glued to her hand, the shorter temper, it could all be explained. Right? She was tired. She was busy. She needed space. But that little voice in my head, the one I kept trying to shut up, was starting to talk louder. I started watching things more closely. The way she got dressed when she ran out to the store. The way she suddenly cared about how her hair looked again, even on weekends. Her phone was never out of reach. Always face down. Always locked, even though we used to have each other's passcodes. One night I jokingly asked, "What, you hiding state secrets in there?" She smirked and said, "Maybe I am," then changed the subject. It wasn't a joke that made me laugh. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in the hallway outside our bedroom, hearing her laugh while she texted someone, her face glowing in the light of her phone. That sound used to be mine. Now it felt like it belonged to someone else. And then there was Jake. I never had a reason not to trust my brother. He and Nicole always got along, but it was innocent. At least, it used to be. Lately, though, it was like they had their own shorthand. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Conversations that stopped the second I walked into the room. And the timing. He'd text her directly now, not me. He'd drop by during the day when I wasn't home. Nicole would say things like, "Jake helped me fix the sink," or "Jake brought over some wine." Like it was the most normal thing in the world. Maybe it was, but it didn't feel normal anymore. One evening, Evan casually said, "Uncle Jake was here yesterday." I hadn't known. Nicole hadn't mentioned it. I asked her about it later, gently, just to see how she'd respond. She looked at me like I was accusing her of something. "You're acting paranoid," she said flat. "Jake stopped by for 10 minutes. Is that a crime now?" She laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. It was the kind that builds a wall between you and the truth. I didn't say anything after that. I just nodded. I've learned that asking too many questions only makes her colder. It's hard to explain what it feels like to live with someone you no longer recognize. She was still there, still doing the day-to-day things, making breakfast, packing Evan's lunch, scrolling through emails, but the connection we once had felt like it had vanished overnight. It wasn't just that she was pulling away. It was that I didn't know who she was pulling toward. I didn't have proof. I didn't have texts or photos or any of the things you're supposed to have before you let your mind go to the worst-case scenario. But I had this growing knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was tired, that I was seeing shadows where there was just life happening, the way it always does, messy and busy and sometimes distant. But something deep in my gut was whispering that I wasn't crazy. Something was going on. I just didn't know what. Not yet. It was supposed to be a moment of clarity, a quiet confirmation that I was overthinking, that my suspicions were just anxiety twisting the normal into something sinister. I didn't take the DNA test because I doubted my son. I took it because I needed something, anything, to prove that I hadn't completely lost my grip on reality. The idea had been gnawing at me for weeks. Not because Evan ever felt like anything but my son. He has my eyes, my chin, my awkward smile. I've been there since the beginning, from midnight feedings to boo-boo kisses to building Lego cities on rainy Saturdays. But when your marriage starts to feel like a puzzle with missing pieces, your brain starts reaching for explanations in places your heart doesn't want to go. I ordered the test quietly. No big plan. Just a quiet Tuesday morning when Nicole was out and Evan was at school. I swabbed my cheek. His. Sent the envelope off with shaking hands. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends. Not Jake. God, especially not Jake. It took 2 weeks. 2 slow, nauseating weeks where every glance, every gesture from Nicole felt like it was happening on the other side of a glass wall. I watched her closely. I watched him too. Still hoping I'd open that email and feel foolish for ever letting myself spiral this far. But when the results came in, it felt like time stopped. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read it again. And again. I thought maybe I'd misread it. Maybe it was a glitch or an error or someone else's results altogether. But my name was there. So was his. And right under it, in bold type I'll never forget, was the truth. I wasn't his biological father. I dropped the phone. I actually dropped it. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold on to it. I sat there on the edge of our bed, staring at the carpet, trying to breathe. My ears were ringing. My chest felt like someone had driven a nail into it. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just sat there in silence. The kind of silence that feels like the air's been sucked out of the room. My first thought wasn't even about Nicole. It was Evan. What do I say to him? Do I say anything? How do you even begin to explain something like this to a child who looks at you like you hung the moon? He was still my son. Nothing could ever change that. But still, I felt hollow. Like something sacred had been taken from me, and I hadn't even noticed until it was already gone. Then came the next thought. Jake. It hit me like a punch to the chest. The timelines. The odd chemistry I'd brushed off. The jokes. The visits. The way her eyes lingered on him just a second too long. It all started lining up in a sick, horrifying way. I tried to tell myself I was jumping to conclusions, that it could have been someone else. But in my bones, I knew. I knew who it was. The person I trusted most outside of her. My own brother. I didn't confront her that day. I didn't storm into the living room and demand answers. I didn't shout or cry or throw anything. I just sat there, still and stunned, like my world had been flipped upside down without warning. Because really, it hadn't been without warning. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Until now. I'd been rehearsing it in my head for days. The confrontation. The questions. The anger. The collapse. Over and over. I imagined the look on her face when I finally told her I knew. I thought maybe she'd cry. Maybe she'd lie. Maybe she'd fall apart the way I had the night I read those results. But what I never expected, not in any of the versions I played out in my mind, was for her to walk in and say it herself, like it was a business decision. It was a Thursday evening. I remember because I'd come home early from work to be alone for a while, just to breathe. I hadn't told her anything yet. I needed to figure out how to say it without unraveling. And then she walked in, heels still on, jacket folded over one arm, face unreadable, and said, "We need to talk." I just nodded. I had no words left. She sat on the edge of the couch, not across from me, not next to me, somewhere in between. Like even her body didn't know how close she was allowed to be anymore. Her voice was flat, like she'd practiced this too. Maybe she had. "I'm moving out," she said. I've been staying with someone. And I'm going to stay there full-time now." She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. It wasn't even shock that hit me. I was past that. What I felt was something colder. A kind of numb, hollow rage that sat just beneath the surface, waiting. I looked at her, really looked, and I couldn't see the woman I'd fallen in love with anymore. All I saw was someone I didn't know. Someone who'd spent months lying to my face, eating dinner across from me, kissing our son goodnight, while she built a second life behind my back. I said nothing. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg. I didn't shout. I just stared. She started explaining herself, like that mattered now. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "Things between us have been off, and Jake was just there." She paused. It felt easy. I think that was the moment something snapped in me. Not when she said she was leaving. Not when she confirmed the affair. But when she called it easy. Like I was hard. Like love is supposed to be effortless, weightless, without consequence. She didn't cry. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even apologize. She just stood up, looked around the room like she was checking to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything, and then said, "I'll come by this weekend to get the rest of my stuff." I wanted to laugh. The rest of her stuff? As if all she was leaving behind was furniture. I said one thing before she left. "You should both pray I don't treat you the way you treated me." She blinked. I don't think she understood what I meant. But she would. She left without another word. And I sat there in the silence she created. Not grieving. Not doubting. Just planning. She gave me 3 days. 3 days to sit in my own house and look around at all the pieces of her she left behind. Shoes by the front door, makeup in the bathroom drawer, her favorite mug still drying on the rack. She said she'd be back Saturday to pick up the rest of her stuff. She never made it to Saturday. That morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't eat, didn't shower. I walked through every room of the house like I was preparing a crime scene. And then I started packing. Not carefully. Not gently, just methodically. Her clothes? Every dress, sweater, shoe, stuffed into garbage bags and dropped from the second-story window onto the lawn. Her books, her candles, her hair straightener, all of it. Gone. I took everything she hadn't taken with her and made sure it would be waiting right outside when she came to collect. I didn't leave a single thing inside. Not one thread. Not one photograph. Then I called the bank. All the credit cards in my name, frozen. Any shared account, blocked. I had already moved the bulk of our savings to a secure, separate account under only my name the day after the DNA results came in. We weren't married under community property, and I had proof of her infidelity. The lawyer confirmed it. I was covered, legally and financially. By noon, I had changed the locks. By 2, I had taken down every photo of her from the walls. By 3, I was sitting on the porch with a coffee, watching the wind scatter the last of her things across the grass. I didn't feel bad. She and my brother wanted a life together. They could start it broke. Jake worked for me. I'd given him a job at my company years ago when he was struggling to get back on his feet. Kept him employed out of loyalty, out of love, out of the belief that blood meant something. By 4 o'clock, he didn't work for me anymore. I made the call to HR, terminate him. Immediately. Send the paperwork certified. Severance? None. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. The truth had already started to ripple through the office, the way truth always does. I sent one text to Jake. Just one. You two can figure out who pays the rent now. I blocked his number before he could respond. I didn't hear from Nicole until late that night. I don't know what she expected to find when she came back. Maybe a second chance. Maybe a civil conversation. Maybe some pathetic, heartbroken version of me still begging for answers. What she found was a lawn full of trash bags and a locked front door. She called. Over and over. I watched her name flash across my phone like it belonged to a stranger. Then I finally answered. Not to talk. Just to say one thing. This chapter of your life is closed. Good luck writing the next one without me. Then I hung up. Blocked her. And for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The first few days after I shut the door on them. On her, on Jake, on everything I thought I knew. Were a blur. Not in the chaotic way trauma sometimes hits, but in a quieter, heavier sense. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I didn't really speak to anyone. I just moved through the house like a ghost, touching walls and doorknobs and cabinets like they might tell me something about the life I used to live here. The silence was unfamiliar. Nicole used to hum when she cleaned or talked to herself in the kitchen. Now, the only sound was the creak of old floorboards and the occasional tap of Evan's toys I hadn't had the heart to pack away yet. I'd done everything I told myself I would. I'd taken back the house. I'd taken back my finances. I'd cut them both out like a surgeon removing something malignant. I thought it would feel like a win. And in some ways, it did. There was a rush, an electric sense of justice when I saw the missed calls roll in from numbers I'd already blocked. I heard, through a friend of a friend, that Jake was shocked when HR delivered his termination notice. That he hadn't even told Nicole he worked for me. That he was embarrassed about it. That made me laugh, once, bitterly. Embarrassed enough to lie about a job, but not enough to keep his hands off my wife. I don't know where they ended up. I assume at one of her friends' places, or maybe with Jake's ex, who has always had a blind spot for him despite everything. I don't care. I really don't. But there's a part of me, I'll admit it, that wonders what it's like now for them. No money. No stability. No job. No fallback plan. I wonder if reality has hit yet. If they look at each other the way they used to look at me. If they're still pretending this is love, or if the cracks have already started showing. But the truth is, none of that matters anymore. Not really. What I didn't expect, after all the revenge and fury and control, was the silence that followed. It was different than before. It wasn't empty, it was just quiet. Like the kind of stillness that comes after a long storm, when everything is soaked and heavy and waiting to dry. I stood in the wreckage of what used to be my life and realized I had to figure out how to live in it, not as a victim, and not as a man trying to get even, but as someone starting over. It's a strange thing, when the rage runs out. When there's nothing left to burn. You're left standing in your own skin, wondering who you are now that you've dismantled the world around you. For a long time, my identity was wrapped in being Nicole's husband, Jake's brother, Evan's father. Now, I'm trying to figure that out again, piece by piece. I still love Evan. That part hasn't changed. Biology didn't make me his father, love did. I don't know what's going to happen with custody, or how this mess will affect him down the line. But I do know one thing. I will never let him feel like I stopped being his dad. He didn't ask for any of this. And whatever else happened, he deserves stability, love, and the truth when he's old enough to hear it. So now I'm here, picking up what's left. Alone, yeah, but not broken. Not anymore. It's strange how fast life shifts. One moment you're planning dinner, thinking about the weekend, folding laundry while your wife hums some songs she can never remember the lyrics to. And then one day, you wake up in the same house, with the same walls, and everything feels like it's been hollowed out from the inside. But here's what I've learned. There's peace in the aftermath. Not right away. Not cleanly. But slowly, moment by moment, it shows up. In the sound of your own breathing. In the quiet cup of coffee you pour without having to wonder where she is. In the stillness of your bedroom when no one is lying to your face. I spent a long time asking questions I'll never get answers to. Why her? Why Jake? Why lie so much when the truth, ugly as it is, could have at least been honest? I don't ask those questions anymore. Because even if I had their answers, they wouldn't change a thing. The damage was already done long before I caught on. I was just the last to know. There are days when I still feel the sting. I'm not going to pretend I'm over it. I'm not going to wrap this up with some cliche about forgiveness or everything happens for a reason. Some things just happen because people choose to be selfish. Some things hurt because they're supposed to. That's how you know you're human. But I'm learning not to carry it every second of every day. I'm focusing on rebuilding. Not just my life, but myself. I started therapy. I go to the gym again, not to punish my body, but to take care of it. I reach out to friends I'd pulled away from. I'm making slow, steady peace with the idea that I can still have a good life, a better life, even after being torn apart by the people I loved most. I see Evan every other weekend now. The custody arrangement is temporary while things get sorted. He's young enough that some of the details will go over his head, but I can see it in his eyes. He knows something broke. Kids always know. I don't speak badly about Nicole or Jake around him. He doesn't need my anger. He just needs me to show up. And I do. I always will. As for her, I haven't spoken to Nicole since that day on the porch. Jake, either. I don't need to. I gave them the silence they earned. Let them sit in the world they built together, one lie at a time. I hope it was worth it. But me? I'm done living in the wreckage. The life I had is over. But the man I was, the man who loved, who trusted, who gave his whole heart, he's still here. Maybe quieter. Maybe slower to open up. But still standing. And now, finally, moving forward.